The morning sun cast long shadows across the obstacle course at Fort Bradley as 22-year-old Eliza Shaw laced up her worn running shoes for the third time. Her fingers trembled slightly despite her attempts to remain calm, the fabric of her standard-issue PT uniform still damp with nervous perspiration from the sleepless night before. Around her, 47 other recruits stretched and prepared for what their drill instructors had ominously called the day that separates the wheat from the chaff. Private Marcus Thompson bounced on the balls of his feet nearby, his confidence radiating like heat from a furnace as he performed elaborate warm-up routines that seemed designed more for show than function. "Hey, Shaw," he called out with a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Try to keep up today, will you? Some of us actually want to make it through basic training." His words carried the casual cruelty that had become commonplace during their 6 weeks at Fort Bradley, each recruit desperately trying to prove their worth while simultaneously tearing down anyone they perceived as weak. Eliza's response was barely audible, a soft, "I'll do my best," that seemed to amuse Thompson and the cluster of recruits who had gathered around him like moths, drawn to a particularly bright flame. She had learned early in her time at Fort Bradley that drawing attention to herself rarely led to positive outcomes. So she had cultivated an almost ghost-like presence, moving through the days with quiet efficiency while others made noise and demanded recognition. What her fellow recruits didn't know was that this careful invisibility had been practiced and perfected long before she ever set foot on military soil. Drill Sergeant Martinez appeared at the front of the formation like a force of nature, his weathered face bearing the scars of 2 decades in the military and his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen combat in 3 different theaters of operation. His presence immediately silenced the nervous chatter among the recruits, each of them snapping to attention with varying degrees of success. Martinez's eyes swept across the formation with the intensity of a hawk surveying potential prey, lingering for just a moment longer on certain faces, including Eliza's. There was something in his gaze that suggested he saw more than others might expect, as if he were evaluating criteria that went beyond the obvious. "Today's exercise is simple in concept, but brutal in execution," Martinez announced, his words cutting through the morning air like shards of glass. "You will run 12 miles through varied terrain, including hills, streams, and obstacles designed to test every muscle fiber in your pathetic excuse for bodies. The first 20 to cross the finish line will receive a weekend pass. The last 10 will spend their weekend scrubbing latrines with toothbrushes." He paused for effect, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the group like a heavy blanket. "But here's the twist that will separate the real soldiers from the pretenders. At random intervals throughout the course, we have placed scenarios that will test your ability to think under pressure and act with honor." The drill sergeant's explanation continued as he paced back and forth in front of the formation, his boots creating small clouds of dust with each step. Eliza found herself studying his movements, noting the way he carried himself with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of controlled violence. There was something in his bearing that reminded her of instructors from another time, another place, though she quickly pushed those thoughts aside before they could fully form. "Some of you will encounter fellow soldiers in distress," Martinez continued, his voice dropping to a more serious tone. "Your response to these situations will be noted and will factor into your final evaluation. Remember, a soldier who abandons his comrades to save his own skin is not a soldier at all. He's a coward wearing our uniform, and he does not deserve to wear it." The silence that followed his words was profound, broken only by the distant sound of other training units going through their morning routines. As the recruits lined up at the starting line, Eliza found herself positioned near the back of the pack, which suited her perfectly. From this vantage point, She could observe the others without drawing unwanted attention to herself. Thompson had positioned himself at the front, naturally, along with several other recruits who had appointed themselves as the unofficial leaders of their training platoon. Their confidence was palpable, radiating from them in waves that seemed to energize some recruits while intimidating others. Private Jennifer Walsh, a former college track star who had joined the military to prove something to herself, and perhaps to a father who had never believed in her abilities, stretched her hamstrings with the methodical precision of someone who understood the science of athletic performance. Her presence at Fort Bradley had been something of a mystery to the other recruits, many of whom came from backgrounds where military service was either a family tradition or a last resort. The starting signal came not with a whistle or a gunshot, but with Martinez's booming voice shouting, "Move out!" The massive body surged forward like water bursting through a dam, each recruit fighting for position while trying to find their optimal pace for the long journey ahead. Eliza held back slightly, allowing the initial chaos to sort itself out, before settling into a steady rhythm that felt sustainable over the long haul. Her breathing was controlled and measured, her stride efficient and economical. To the casual observer, she appeared to be just another recruit trying to find her place in the pack. But there was something in her movement, a fluid precision, that suggested training that went far beyond the past. 6 weeks of basic instruction. The first mile passed through relatively flat terrain, giving the faster runners an opportunity to establish their dominance while the rest of the pack found their natural positions. Thompson had taken an early lead, his form impressive as he bounded across the uneven ground with the confidence of someone who had trained for this moment his entire life. Walsh ran in a pack of 5 other strong runners about 50 yards behind Thompson, her stride efficient and economical, conserving energy for the challenges that lay ahead. She had the look of someone who understood endurance events, someone who knew that the real race wouldn't begin until the later miles, when conditioning and mental toughness would separate the pretenders from the genuine competitors. Eliza maintained her position in the middle of the pack, her breathing steady and controlled despite the increasing pace set by the leaders. She had learned long ago that endurance was not just about physical conditioning, but about mental discipline and the ability to remain calm under pressure. Her mind wandered as she ran, touching briefly on memories that she quickly suppressed, focusing instead on the rhythm of her footfalls and the sensation of air flowing in and out of her lungs. What none of her fellow recruits suspected was that this seemingly unremarkable girl from Nebraska had spent years preparing for moments exactly like this one. The quiet demeanor, the careful invisibility, the reluctance to stand out, all of it was as carefully crafted as any weapon in the military's arsenal. But that weapon remained sheathed, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. As they approached the second mile marker, Eliza caught sight of Martinez observing from a hill overlooking the course. Even at a distance, she could feel his attention like a weight across her shoulders. There was something in his posture that suggested he was watching for more than just basic performance metrics. He was looking for something specific, something that not all of the recruits would be able to provide. The morning air was crisp and clean, filled with the sounds of 48 sets of military boots striking the earth in an irregular rhythm that gradually began to organize itself as the stronger runners pulled ahead and the field spread out across the landscape. For most of the recruits, this was simply another training exercise, another hurdle to overcome on their path to becoming soldiers. For Eliza Shaw, it was the beginning of something much more significant, the first step in a carefully orchestrated revelation that would change everything her fellow recruits thought they knew about the quiet girl who rarely spoke above a whisper. The laughter and dismissive comments from earlier in the morning would soon seem like echoes from another lifetime, replaced by something much more profound and lasting. But for now, she was content to run in the middle of the pack, conserving her energy and watching for the moment when everything would change. The second mile introduced the first significant hill, a steep incline that immediately separated the well-conditioned runners from those who had relied more on enthusiasm than preparation. Several recruits began to struggle almost immediately, their breathing becoming labored as they fought against gravity and their own limitations. Thompson maintained his lead, though his earlier swagger had been replaced by grim determination, as the reality of the 12-mile course began to assert itself. His form remained strong, but there were subtle signs that he was working harder than he had anticipated. A slight tightening in his shoulders, a barely perceptible change in his breathing pattern. Walsh continued to run with her tactical group, her college training evident in the way she managed the hill. She attacked the incline with steady, measured steps, neither burning herself out with an overly aggressive pace, nor allowing herself to fall behind the leaders. Her background in competitive athletics had taught her the importance of patience in endurance events. Eliza maintained her steady pace, neither pushing to catch the leaders nor falling back with the strugglers. To the casual observer, she appeared to be simply holding her own, running within her capabilities while managing the challenging terrain. But those who looked more carefully might have noticed the controlled efficiency of her movement, the way she seemed to flow up the hill rather than fight against it. As they crested the hill and began the descent on the other side, the course took them through a dense wooded area, where the canopy blocked much of the morning sun and created a cathedral-like atmosphere. The change in environment seemed to affect different runners in various ways, with some finding the cooler air refreshing, while others struggled with the uneven terrain and reduced visibility. Private David Kim, a former computer programmer who had joined the military after losing his job during a corporate restructuring, found himself running alongside Eliza as they navigated the wooded section. His inexperience with this type of physical activity was evident in his struggling pace, though his determination to continue was admirable. "This is harder than I expected," he admitted between labored breaths, his honesty refreshing in an environment where most recruits felt compelled to project confidence, regardless of their actual condition. "The first few miles are always the hardest," Eliza replied quietly, her voice showing none of the strain that Kim was experiencing. "Your body needs time to find its rhythm." Kim glanced at her curiously, noting that she seemed remarkably composed. For someone who was supposedly struggling with the same challenges that had him fighting for every breath, there was something in her demeanor that suggested reserves of strength and experience that didn't match her quiet, unassuming persona. It was during the third mile that they encountered the first scenario Martinez had warned them about. A figure in military fatigues lay motionless beside the trail, apparently unconscious and in need of assistance. The scenario was clearly artificial, the positioning too perfect, the staging too obvious, but it was designed to test the recruits' priorities and decision-making abilities under pressure. Thompson, still in the lead, barely slowed as he passed the figure. His calculation was obvious and probably correct from a purely competitive standpoint. Stopping would cost him his position and potentially his weekend pass. The military valued many qualities, but it also rewarded results, and finishing in the top 20 was a measurable result that would be noted in his record. Walsh and her group also passed by after a brief hesitation, though one of them, Private Rodriguez from Texas, broke away from the group to check on the fallen soldier. His action caused a ripple effect among the other runners, with some stopping to help while others continued on, each making a split-second decision that would later be evaluated by their instructors. Eliza slowed as she approached the scenario, her instincts telling her that this was more than just a simple test of priorities. Something about the way the figure was positioned seemed wrong, too artful, too deliberate. She knelt beside the prone form and quickly determined that while the scenario was indeed artificial, it was meant to simulate a specific type of injury. that would require particular care and movement and transportation done without hesitation. She began the process of preparing the figure for transport using techniques that seemed to flow from her muscle memory rather than her conscious training. Other recruits who had stopped to help watched in amazement as Eliza demonstrated a level of competence that seemed far beyond what they had learned in their basic first aid classes. Her movements were precise and confident, each action building upon the previous one in a sequence that spoke of extensive training and practical experience. When she finally lifted the simulated casualty and began moving down the trail, several of the other recruits fell in behind her, apparently content to let her take the lead in this portion of the exercise. Kim, who had stopped to help despite his own struggles with the pace, watched Eliza's performance with growing amazement. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked as they resumed running, the simulated casualty having been handed off to support personnel who had appeared as if from nowhere. Eliza's response was characteristically brief. "Just picked it up along the way." The answer revealed nothing while seeming to satisfy the question, a skill that suggested experience in deflecting inquiries about personal background and training. The 4th and 5th miles took the group through increasingly challenging terrain, including a stream crossing that required careful navigation to avoid injury and a series of natural obstacles that tested balance and agility as much as endurance. Eliza had fallen back in the overall standings due to her stop at the first scenario, but she seemed unconcerned with her position, focusing instead on maintaining her steady pace and helping other recruits navigate the more technical sections of the course. By the 6th mile, the field had spread out considerably, with Thompson and 2 other strong runners maintaining a significant lead, while a large group of runners occupied the middle positions. Several recruits had already dropped out, either due to injury or exhaustion, and were being transported back to base by support vehicles that shadowed the exercise. The attrition rate was higher than usual, which Martinez noted with apparent satisfaction as he monitored the progress from various checkpoints along the route. This particular exercise had been designed to push the recruits beyond their comfort zones, to create situations where their true character would be revealed under stress and fatigue. The 7th mile introduced a new challenge in the form of a simulated combat zone, complete with smoke grenades and recorded sound effects designed to create a stressful environment. Recruits were required to low crawl under wire obstacles while maintaining forward progress toward the next checkpoint. This portion of the exercise favored smaller, more agile participants, and several of the leaders found their advantages reduced as they struggled with the technical requirements of the obstacles. Thompson, despite his impressive running performance, found himself slowed significantly by the combat simulation, his larger frame making the low crawl sections particularly challenging. Eliza moved through this section with surprising grace, her body seeming to flow around and under obstacles with minimal wasted motion. Other recruits watched her progress with growing interest, beginning to suspect that there was more to the quiet girl from Nebraska than met the eye. Her techniques were too polished, too professional for someone who had supposedly learned everything at Fort Bradley over the past 6 weeks. The precision of her movement, the efficiency of her obstacle negotiation, the calm way she approached each challenge, all of it suggested training that went far beyond basic military instruction. But when asked about her background, she continued to deflect with the same quiet humility that had characterized her entire time at Fort Bradley. As they emerged from the simulated combat zone, Kim found himself running alongside Eliza once again. His curiosity had been building throughout the exercise, fueled by repeated observations of capabilities that didn't match her supposed background. "You're not like the rest of us, are you?" he asked directly, his programmer's mind drawn to patterns and inconsistencies that others might miss. Eliza glanced at him with a slight smile that revealed nothing. "We're all different in our own ways. she replied diplomatically. Basic training, as a way of bringing out things in people that they didn't know they had. Her answer was perfectly reasonable and completely uninformative, delivered with the practiced ease of someone who had spent considerable time learning how to avoid saying anything meaningful while appearing to be completely open and honest. Kim sensed that there was much more to the story, but before he could pursue the matter further, they encountered something that would change everything, not just for Eliza, but for everyone who witnessed what happened next. Sergeant Rodriguez, a massive man who served as one of the assistant drill instructors, lay collapsed beside the trail ahead of them. Unlike the previous scenario, this appeared to be genuine, with Rodriguez's face flushed and his breathing shallow and irregular. Several recruits had gathered around him, but none seemed to know how to proceed. The situation presented a significant dilemma for the participants. Rodriguez easily weighed 200 pounds and was positioned more than 3 miles from the finish line over difficult terrain. Attempting to carry him would be physically demanding under the best of circumstances, and doing so while already fatigued from 7 miles of running seemed nearly impossible for most of the recruits. This was the moment when everything would change, when the quiet girl from Nebraska would finally reveal capabilities that would force everyone to reconsider everything they thought they knew about strength, preparation, and the power of careful training hidden beneath an unremarkable exterior. The laughter from earlier that morning was about to become a distant memory, replaced by something much more profound and lasting. Thompson arrived at the scene moments after Eliza, his chest heaving from the exertion of maintaining his lead through 7 miles of challenging terrain. He took one look at the massive, unconscious form of Sergeant Rodriguez and began calculating the cost of getting involved. His lead had been reduced during the combat zone, and stopping now would likely cost him any chance of finishing in the top 20. The conflict was written across his face as clearly as words on a page: duty versus ambition, the values they had been taught versus the rewards they had been promised. For several long seconds, he hesitated, torn between his competitive instincts and his sense of military obligation. The weekend pass, the recognition, the advantage in their final evaluations, all of it hung in the balance. Someone else will handle it, Thompson muttered, more to himself than to anyone else, and continued toward the finish line. His decision drew disapproving looks from some of the other recruits, but others seemed to understand his reasoning. In a system that rewarded individual achievement, helping others could be seen as a luxury that few could afford. Walsh arrived with her diminished group shortly thereafter and faced the same impossible choice. She had maintained a strong position throughout the race and was well positioned to earn one of the coveted weekend passes. Her college track experience had taught her that endurance events were won and lost in moments exactly like this one, when fatigue clouded judgment and difficult decisions had to be made under pressure. But leaving Rodriguez behind would violate everything she believed about military service and personal honor. After a brief consultation with her companions, she decided to stay and help, though none of them seemed to have a clear plan for how to transport a 200-pound unconscious man over such a distance. "We need to get him to medical attention," Walsh said, kneeling beside Rodriguez and checking his pulse. "But I don't know how we're going to carry him 3 miles. Even with all of us working together, it's going to be almost impossible." The other recruits nodded their agreement, each of them recognizing the physical reality of the situation. Rodriguez was not a small man, built like the former linebacker he had been before joining the military 20 years earlier. His unconscious weight would be even more difficult to manage than his normal mass, and the terrain ahead included hills, obstacles, and uneven ground that would challenge even a team of strong, rested individuals. It was at this moment that Eliza Shaw stepped forward and changed everything. Without hesitation or apparent effort, She positioned herself beside Rodriguez and began the process of lifting him into a carrying position. The other recruits watched in stunned amazement as she hoisted the massive sergeant across her shoulders in a fireman's carry that demonstrated both perfect technique and incredible strength. The movement was so smooth and professional that several of the observers initially thought it must be easier than it looked. Rodriguez was not a small man with the thick, muscular build of someone who had spent 20 years maintaining military fitness standards. The fact that Eliza, who was at least 50 pounds lighter than the man she was carrying, could lift him at all was impressive. The fact that she did so with such apparent ease suggested a level of training and conditioning that went far beyond what any of them had suspected. "I've got him," she said simply, adjusting Rodriguez's position on her shoulders to ensure maximum stability and minimum strain on both of them. Her breathing remained controlled and steady, showing no signs of the exertion that should have been evident after such a lift. The other recruits stared in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Walsh was the first to recover her voice, asking the question that was on everyone's mind. "Are you sure you can carry him the whole way? It's still 3 miles to the finish line." Her concern was genuine, born from her own understanding of the physical demands involved in such an endeavor. She had trained at elite levels for years and knew the toll that carrying additional weight could take on the human body, especially over extended distances. Eliza's response was matter-of-fact, delivered without boasting or false bravado. "He needs medical attention, and this is the fastest way to get him there." With that simple statement, she began moving down the trail, carrying Rodriguez with the same steady pace she had maintained throughout the exercise. Her stride remained even and controlled, showing no signs of the additional burden she now carried. It was as if the laws of physics had been temporarily suspended, allowing this unremarkable-looking recruit to perform feats that should have been impossible. The other recruits fell in behind her, some out of genuine concern for Rodriguez, others out of curiosity about Eliza's capabilities, and still others because they were unsure what else to do in such an unusual situation. The procession that formed resembled nothing so much as a military unit moving with purpose and coordination. Despite the fact that none of them had trained together for such a scenario. Kim, still running beside her when his own endurance allowed, attempted to offer assistance several times, but Eliza politely declined each offer. Her reasons were practical rather than prideful. She had Rodriguez positioned exactly where she needed him for optimal weight distribution and stability, and any attempt to share the load would likely disrupt the delicate balance she had achieved. "This is incredible," Kim said, his voice filled with amazement. "I've never seen anything like this. Where did you learn to carry someone like that?" Eliza's response was characteristically evasive. "Sometimes you just do what needs to be done." But Kim was beginning to understand that there was much more to the story. The technical precision of her carrying technique, the apparent ease with which she managed Rodriguez's weight, the calm confidence with which she approached the remaining 3 miles. None of it was accidental or improvised. As they moved through the 8th mile, Eliza's performance became even more remarkable. Not only was she maintaining her pace while carrying Rodriguez, but she was also navigating obstacles and uneven terrain with the skill of someone who had done this type of thing many times before. Her footwork was precise and calculated, each step chosen to minimize the impact on both herself and her passenger, while maintaining forward momentum. Walsh, who had been observing Eliza's performance with growing amazement, finally voiced what many of them were thinking. "You've done this before, haven't you? This isn't something you learned in basic training." Her statement was delivered without accusation, but with the curiosity of someone who recognized expertise when she saw it. Walsh had spent years training with elite athletes and coaches, and she knew the difference between natural talent and developed skill. What she was witnessing fell firmly into the latter category. Eliza's response was characteristically brief. We all have things in our past that prepared us for this moment. The answer revealed nothing while acknowledging everything. A skill. That suggested experience in deflecting inquiries about personal history. But for the other recruits, it was becoming increasingly clear that the quiet girl from Nebraska was much more than she appeared to be. The 9th mile took them through another stream crossing, and this was where Eliza's skills truly shone. While other recruits struggled to maintain their footing on the slippery rocks while carrying only their own weight, Eliza navigated the crossing with Rodriguez still on her shoulders. Her movements careful but confident. She tested each step before committing her full weight, ensuring that both she and her passenger would remain dry and secure. The precision of her movement, the calm way she approached each potential hazard, the professional competence she displayed under pressure, all of it spoke to training that went far beyond anything available at Fort Bradley. Several of the recruits who had initially continued past, the scenario began to reappear, having apparently reached some checkpoint where they learned about Rodriguez's condition and were ordered to return and assist. Thompson was among them, his face showing a mixture of admiration and perhaps some regret about his earlier decision to continue alone. "Jesus, Shaw," he said as he fell into step beside the group, his usual confidence replaced by genuine amazement. "Where did you learn to do that?" His question echoed the thoughts of everyone present, but Eliza seemed unwilling or unable to provide a satisfactory answer. "Just something you pick up," she replied, her breathing still remarkably controlled, despite having carried Rodriguez for more than a mile over challenging terrain. The non-answer frustrated some of the other recruits, but it was becoming clear that Eliza was not inclined to share details about her background or training. Whatever had prepared her for this moment, she was determined to keep it private, at least for now. As they approached the 10-mile mark, with Rodriguez still unconscious on her shoulders and her pace still steady and controlled, Eliza had transformed from the quiet, unremarkable recruit who had started the morning into something approaching legend. The laughter and dismissive comments from earlier seemed like echoes from another lifetime, replaced by respect, admiration, and a growing understanding that appearances could be profoundly deceiving. The girl who had stopped running had become the soldier who wouldn't stop carrying, and in doing so, she had revealed truths about strength, preparation, and character that would be remembered long after the weekend passes had been forgotten. The 10th mile brought them to another series of obstacles, including a rope climb and a wall that required teamwork to surmount. Under normal circumstances, these challenges would have been difficult enough for individuals carrying only their own weight. With Rodriguez unconscious and requiring constant care, the obstacles seemed nearly impossible. Once again, Eliza surprised everyone with her problem-solving abilities and technical skills. At the rope climb, she somehow managed to secure Rodriguez to her back in a way that allowed her to use both hands while ensuring his safety. Her climbing technique was flawless, each movement economical and precise, and she reached the top of the obstacle in what seemed like record time given the circumstances. "How is she doing that?" Walsh whispered to Kim, her voice filled with amazement. "I'd been training for years, and I couldn't climb that rope carrying my own pack, let alone an unconscious man." Kim shook his head in wonder. "I don't think this is natural talent," he replied quietly. "This is training. Serious, professional training. The kind you don't get by accident." The wall presented a different challenge, requiring the cooperation of multiple recruits to lift Rodriguez to safety while Eliza coordinated from above. Her instructions were clear and professional, delivered with the authority of someone accustomed to leading others in high-stress situations. "Thompson, position yourself at the base of the wall," she called down, her voice carrying easily over the noise of the exercise. "Walsh, you and Kim help lift Rodriguez while I pull from above. We need to move as one unit. No sudden movements. No rushing. The other recruits followed her directions without question, perhaps sensing that she knew exactly what she was doing, even if they didn't understand how. The coordination required to safely move Rodriguez over the wall while maintaining his position and ensuring his airway remained clear was complex and demanding. But under Eliza's direction, it proceeded smoothly. Walsh, who had been observing Eliza's performance with growing interest throughout the exercise, finally voiced what many of them were thinking. You've done this before, haven't you? This isn't something you learned in basic training. Her statement was delivered without accusation, but with the curiosity of someone who recognized expertise when she saw it. Eliza's response was characteristically brief. We all have things in our past that prepared us for this moment. The answer revealed nothing while edging everything, a skill that suggested experience in deflecting inquiries about personal history. But for those watching, it was becoming impossible to ignore the evidence of their own eyes. As they moved through the 11th mile, word of their progress had apparently spread ahead of them. Several medical personnel appeared at checkpoints along the route, monitoring Rodriguez's condition and providing guidance to Eliza about his care during transport. Their professional assessment was clear. Whoever was carrying Rodriguez was doing an exceptional job of maintaining proper positioning and monitoring his vital signs. Outstanding work, one of the medics said to Eliza as they paused at a checkpoint. Your technique is textbook perfect. Where did you learn combat casualty care? Eliza's response was the same careful deflection she had been using throughout the exercise, just trying to take care of a fellow soldier. But the medic's trained eye had caught something that the recruits might have missed. The way Eliza had positioned Rodriguez, the monitoring technique she was using, the professional competence she displayed, all of it suggested medical training as well as physical conditioning. Martinez appeared at the checkpoint as if summoned by some invisible signal, his weathered face showing an expression that none of the recruits had seen before. There was respect in his eyes as he looked at Eliza, mixed with something that might have been recognition or perhaps suspicion. He approached her with the careful deliberation of someone who was reassessing a previous evaluation. Outstanding work, Shaw, he said, his voice carrying a tone of professional approval that he rarely used with recruits. That's textbook combat extraction technique. He paused for a moment, studying her face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. Where exactly did you learn those skills? Eliza met his gaze steadily, her expression revealing nothing of whatever thoughts might be running through her mind. Just trying to be the best soldier I can be, drill sergeant. Her answer was perfectly appropriate and completely uninformative. A response that seemed to both satisfy and frustrate Martinez simultaneously. But something had shifted in his demeanor, a subtle change that suggested he was beginning to understand that there was much more to Private Shaw than her personnel file indicated. The other recruits watched this exchange with growing fascination. Martinez was not easily impressed, and his obvious respect for Eliza's performance carried significant weight. His words transformed the previous events from an interesting display of strength into something approaching professional recognition. As they prepared to continue toward the finish line, Thompson approached Eliza with an expression that mixed admiration with curiosity. His earlier competitiveness had been replaced by genuine respect for what he had witnessed. Shaw, I need to apologize, he said quietly, his voice carrying a sincerity that surprised everyone who heard it. I judged you based on appearances and completely missed what you're really capable of. That was ignorant and unfair. His words represented a significant shift in perspective, forcing him to confront his own biases and assumptions about strength and capability. The quiet girl he had dismissed earlier that morning had demonstrated abilities that far exceeded his own, despite his physical advantages and obvious conditioning. Eliza's response was characteristically gracious. We all make judgments based on limited information. What matters is how we respond when we learn more. Her diplomatic acceptance of his apology spoke to a maturity and wisdom that seemed beyond her apparent years. It was another small indication of experiences and training that went far beyond what most 22-year-olds possessed. Kim, who had been running alongside them throughout much of the exercise, added his own perspective. I've been thinking about this whole situation, and I keep coming back to the same conclusion. What you're doing isn't possible without extensive training and preparation. This isn't something someone just figures out on the spot. His analytical mind had been working to understand the patterns and capabilities he had observed, and the conclusions he had reached were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The technical precision, the physical conditioning, the professional competence, all of it pointed to background and training that didn't match Eliza's official story. Walsh nodded her agreement. I've trained with some of the best athletes in the country, and I've never seen anything like what you're doing right now. The endurance, the strength, the technical knowledge. It's like watching a professional at work. Our assessment carried the weight of someone who understood elite performance and could recognize expertise when she encountered it. What she was witnessing was not the improvised response of a gifted amateur, but the practice competence of someone who had been specifically trained for exactly this type of situation. As they entered the final mile of the course, Eliza continued to carry Rodriguez with the same steady pace and professional competence she had maintained throughout the exercise. Her breathing remained controlled, her stride remained even, and her monitoring of Rodriguez's condition remained constant and thorough. The group that had formed around her had taken on the characteristics of a military unit, moving with coordination and purpose despite having no formal training together. Her quiet leadership and demonstrated competence had naturally assumed command of the situation, creating order and efficiency where there might otherwise have been chaos and confusion. But perhaps most significantly, the dynamics within their training platoon had fundamentally shifted. The quiet girl from Nebraska, who had started the morning as an unremarkable presence in the background, had emerged as someone worthy of respect and admiration. The laughter and dismissive comments from earlier seemed like echoes from another lifetime, replaced by recognition of capabilities that went far beyond anything her fellow recruits had suspected. As they approached the finish line, with Rodriguez still unconscious on her shoulders and her pace still steady and controlled, Eliza had accomplished something remarkable. She had revealed truths about strength, preparation, and character while maintaining the operational security that protected whatever deeper purposes had brought her to Fort Bradley. The transformation was complete, but the questions it raised were just beginning. The final stretch to the finish line took on the character of a victory parade, with Eliza surrounded by fellow recruits who peppered her with questions and expressions of amazement. She deflected most of the attention with her characteristic humility, but it was clear that her status within the group had fundamentally changed. No longer was she the quiet girl who barely spoke above a whisper. She had become someone worthy of respect and admiration, someone whose capabilities commanded attention and whose judgment could be trusted under pressure. As they crossed the finish line together, the entire group maintaining formation around Eliza, despite having no obligation to do so, they were greeted by Captain Williams, the commanding officer of their training battalion. Williams had obviously been briefed on the events of the exercise, and his expression showed both pride and intense curiosity about the recruit who had performed so extraordinarily. "Miss Shaw," he said, his voice carrying the formal tone of a superior officer addressing a subordinate, "I understand you performed exceptionally today. That kind of leadership and technical skill under pressure is exactly what we're looking for in our soldiers." He paused, his eyes studying her face with an intensity that suggested he was looking for something specific, some confirmation of suspicions that had been building throughout her time at Fort Bradley. "I'd like to speak with you privately after. You've had a chance to clean up and rest." The invitation was clearly not optional, delivered with the polite formality the military officers used when issuing orders disguised as requests. Eliza nodded her acceptance, her expression showing no surprise or concern about the impending interview. If anything, she seemed to have been expecting such a conversation. As the other recruits were dismissed to shower and prepare for the evening meal, several of them made a point of personally thanking Eliza for her leadership during the crisis. Their words were genuine and heartfelt, reflecting a fundamental shift in their perception of their quiet teammate. Thompson lingered after the others had departed, his earlier dismissive attitude completely transformed into genuine respect. "I don't know how you did it, but that was the most incredible thing I've ever seen," he said honestly. "Whatever prepared you for this moment, I'm grateful that circumstances brought us together during training." Walsh remained as well, her analytical mind still working to process everything she had witnessed. "Whatever your story is," she said quietly, "I hope someday you'll trust us enough to share it. What you did today was extraordinary, and I don't think it was luck or natural talent." Her words carried the weight of personal experience, the observation of someone who had trained at elite levels and could recognize expertise when she encountered it. Elijah's response was characteristically understated. "Sometimes we're all capable of more than we realize." The statement could have been taken as false modesty, but something in her tone suggested deeper truths about human potential and the power of training and preparation. As she made her way to the barracks for a much-needed shower, Eliza reflected on the events of the day and their potential consequences. She had managed to maintain her cover for 6 weeks, blending in with the other recruits and keeping her background hidden from scrutiny. Today's performance had undoubtedly blown that carefully maintained anonymity, but she had faced a choice between maintaining her secret and potentially allowing Rodriguez to suffer serious injury or death. The decision had been easy, really. All the training and conditioning she had received over the years had been focused on one simple principle: the mission comes first, but people matter most. The shower felt incredible after the grueling exercise. Hot water washing away the sweat and dust of 12 miles over challenging terrain. As she stood under the stream, Eliza allowed herself to truly relax for the first time in hours, feeling the tension drain from muscles that had been pushed to their limits. Other recruits filtered into the shower area. Their conversations dominated by discussions of the day's events and speculation about Eliza's background and abilities. She listened to their theories with mild amusement, noting how close some of them came to the truth while remaining completely off target. In their conclusions, by the time she emerged from the shower area, dressed in fresh fatigues and feeling considerably more human, word of her performance had spread throughout the training battalion. Recruits from other platoons had heard about the girl who had carried a 200-pound sergeant 3 miles without breaking stride, and many of them made excuses to walk past her barracks or linger in areas where they might catch a glimpse of this legendary figure. The attention made Eliza uncomfortable, not because she was naturally shy, but because visibility had always been the enemy of operational security. The more people who knew about her capabilities, the more likely it became that someone would start asking the right questions and potentially compromise. Whatever mission had brought her to Fort Bradley in the first place. Captain Williams's office was located in the battalion headquarters, an austere building that reflected the military's preference for function over form. Eliza arrived precisely at the appointed time, her uniform immaculate and her bearing reflecting the confidence and discipline that had somehow remained hidden for the past 6 weeks. She knocked twice on the captain's door and waited for permission to enter. "Come in, Shaw," Williams called from inside. his voice carrying the weariness of a career officer who had seen too much and slept too little. The office was spartanly furnished with standard military furniture and a handful of personal items that spoke to Williams's long service and dedication to his soldiers. Framed photos on his desk showed him with various units over the years, each image capturing a moment of pride or accomplishment in what had clearly been a distinguished career. Williams gestured for her to take a seat in the chair facing his desk, then studied her for several long moments before speaking. His expression was thoughtful rather than accusatory, but there was an intensity in his gaze that suggested he was looking for something specific, some tell or indication that would confirm his suspicions about her background. "What you did today was remarkable," he began, his tone carefully neutral. "The technical skills you displayed, the physical conditioning required to carry Rodriguez 3 miles, the leadership you showed in managing the other recruits, these are not things typically seen in basic training." He paused, allowing his words to settle before continuing. "In fact, they're exactly the kinds of skills we see in our most elite units." Eliza remained silent, her expression attentive but revealing nothing about her thoughts or reactions to his observations. Years of training had taught her the value of listening more than speaking, especially when dealing with intelligent officers who were skilled at extracting information from reluctant sources. Williams continued, his careful probing. "Your file shows that you enlisted directly from civilian life, with no prior military service or specialized training. You list your previous occupation as a retail clerk from Nebraska, which seems inconsistent with the capabilities you demonstrated today." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving her face. "So, I'm going to ask you directly, Shaw. Is there anything in your background that you haven't disclosed? Any training or experience that might explain what we witnessed?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication and possibility. Eliza knew that her answer would likely determine not only her immediate future, but potentially the success or failure of whatever deeper purpose had brought her to this place. She could feel the weight of multiple futures balanced on the edge of her next words. "Sir," Eliza said carefully, choosing each word with precision, "I believe that extreme circumstances can bring out capabilities in people that they didn't know they possessed. Today, I was faced with a situation where a fellow soldier needed help, and I did what I thought was necessary." Her answer was truthful as far as it went, while revealing nothing that could compromise operational security. Williams nodded slowly, recognizing the skill with which she had deflected his question while appearing to answer it completely. "That's a very diplomatic response, Shaw. The kind of answer someone gives when they've been trained in operational security and information compartmentalization." His observation was delivered without accusation. His observation, but with the recognition of one professional acknowledging another's skills. The silence that followed stretched for several minutes, each of them waiting to see if the other would reveal more than they intended. Finally, Williams leaned back in his chair and smiled slightly, an expression that suggested he had reached some internal conclusion about the situation. "You know," he said conversationally, "we sometimes get special requests from other units, looking for recruits with particular skills or potential. Sometimes these requests come with very specific instructions about how to handle certain individuals." He paused, watching her face for any reaction. "And sometimes we're asked to provide opportunities for those individuals to demonstrate their capabilities in realistic scenarios." Eliza felt her heartbeat quicken slightly, though she maintained her calm exterior. Williams's words suggested that today's events might not have been the coincidence they appeared to be, that Rodriguez's collapse might have been orchestrated to create exactly the situation that had unfolded. If true, it meant that her cover had been blown much earlier than she had realized, and that she had been under observation and evaluation for purposes she didn't yet understand. "Sir," she said, Carefully, "I'm not sure I understand what you're suggesting." Her response was appropriately confused and innocent, the reaction of someone who had no idea what deeper games might be in play around her. Williams's smile widened slightly. "Oh, I think you understand perfectly, Shaw. The question is whether you're ready to acknowledge that understanding." He reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a manila folder that looked suspiciously like a personnel file, though considerably thicker than what should have been necessary for a basic training. "Recruit." "This folder contains some very interesting reading," he continued, tapping the manila cover with his finger. "Records of training courses that officially don't exist. Performance evaluations from units that aren't supposed to have recruits. And recommendations from officers whose names are classified above my clearance level." His tone remained conversational, but the implications of his words were profound. If Williams already knew about her background, then maintaining her cover story was pointless and potentially counterproductive. On the other hand, if this was some kind of fishing expedition, revealing too much could compromise not only her mission, but potentially the safety of other operatives. "I'm afraid I don't know what you mean, sir," she said, maintaining her persona of confused innocence while buying time to assess the situation. "My record should be straightforward. I'm just a girl from Nebraska who wanted to serve her country." Williams chuckled softly. "Shaw, or whatever your real name might be, we both know that's not true. The question is whether you trust me enough to drop the act and have an honest conversation about why you're really here." He opened the manila folder and glanced at its contents. "Because according to this file, you're exactly the kind of soldier we need for a very specific and very important mission. The revelation that there might be a mission waiting for her, something beyond the routine of basic training, and the gradual revelation of her true capabilities sent a surge of anticipation through Eliza's system. She had been wondering why she had been placed in such a mundane assignment when her skills and training suggested she was destined for more specialized work. "Assuming, for the sake of argument, that you're correct about my background," she said. "Carefully, what kind of mission are we talking about?" Her question was hypothetical in its phrasing, but clearly indicated her willingness to engage in a more substantive conversation. Williams closed the folder and leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious and intense. "The kind that requires someone with your particular combination of skills and the ability to blend in completely with regular military personnel. The kind that might require carrying injured teammates across hostile territory while maintaining operational security." His words painted a picture of exactly the type of work she had been trained for, the kind of mission that would justify all the years of preparation and conditioning. "And if I were hypothetically interested in such a mission," Eliza asked, dropping some of her pretense while still maintaining plausible deniability, "what would be the next step in this process?" Williams's smile returned, this time with genuine warmth and approval. "The next step would be for you to finish basic training. Like any other recruit, continue to demonstrate the leadership and capabilities you showed today, and wait for further instructions." He paused, his expression becoming more serious. "But there's one condition that's non-negotiable. You maintain absolute operational security about this conversation and any future communications until you're specifically cleared to do otherwise." Eliza nodded her understanding, recognizing the familiar protocols of compartmentalized operations and need-to-know information sharing. "Understood, sir? And the other recruits?" she asked. "Continue to be the soldier you've been for the past 6 weeks," Williams replied. "Quiet, competent, but unremarkable in most circumstances. What happened today was extraordinary, but it needs to be seen as a one-time response to an emergency, rather than a demonstration of extensive specialized training." His instructions were clear and familiar, the kind of operational guidance she had received many times before in different contexts. As she prepared to leave Williams's office, Eliza felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. The careful balance she had been maintaining for 6 weeks had finally shifted, but toward a purpose that justified all the deception and misdirection. "One more thing, Shaw," Williams said as she reached the door. "What you did today, carrying Rodriguez those 3 miles, that took real courage and strength. Regardless of what training you might have had, that was the action of a true soldier." His words carried genuine respect and admiration, recognition from one warrior to another. Walking back to the barracks, Eliza reflected on the day's events and their implications for her future. The careful persona she had maintained for 6 weeks had been shattered in a single afternoon. But perhaps that had always been the plan. Perhaps Rodriguez's collapse had been engineered, specifically to create the circumstances that would allow her to demonstrate her capabilities while maintaining plausible cover for her actions. The thought was both unsettling and oddly comforting. Unsettling, because it suggested a level of manipulation and control that she hadn't fully appreciated, but comforting because it meant that her actions had been anticipated and approved by those who understood their larger significance. The next morning brought news that Rodriguez was recovering well from what had been diagnosed as severe heat exhaustion, complicated by dehydration. The medical team praised the quality of care he had received during transport, noting that whoever had carried him had maintained proper positioning and monitoring throughout the journey. Their professional assessment validated Eliza's actions, while raising additional questions about her medical training and experience. But more importantly, it confirmed that her decision to reveal her capabilities had likely saved Rodriguez's life, justifying the risk she had taken with her. Operational security. Martinez appeared at morning formation with his usual commanding presence, but there was something different in his demeanor as he addressed the platoon. His eyes lingered on Eliza for several seconds longer than usual, and his tone carried undertones that suggested layers of meaning beyond his surface words. "Yesterday's exercise revealed important things about each of you," he announced to the assembled recruits. "Some of you discovered reserves of strength and courage you didn't know you possessed. Others learned valuable lessons about priorities and the true meaning of military service." His words were carefully chosen, acknowledging the extraordinary events without singling out any individual for special attention. "Private Shaw," he continued, his voice taking on a more formal tone, "your actions yesterday exemplified the finest traditions of military service. You placed the welfare of a fellow soldier above your own interests and demonstrated the kind of leadership we hope to develop in all our recruits." The public recognition was both an honor and a burden, elevating her status while making it more difficult to maintain the low profile she preferred. The praise from Martinez carried significant weight among the other recruits, many of whom had developed deep respect for the drill sergeant's judgment and experience. His words transformed the previous day's events from an interesting anomaly into something approaching legend, ensuring that Eliza's actions would be remembered and discussed long after their basic training had ended. Training continued over the following days, but the dynamics within the platoon had fundamentally shifted. The other recruits now viewed Eliza through a different lens, approaching her for advice and guidance on technical matters and looking to her for leadership in challenging situations. Thompson, in particular, seemed determined to make amends for his earlier dismissive attitude. During a particularly challenging obstacle course exercise, he made a point of working alongside Eliza and seeking her input on strategy and technique. "I've been thinking about what happened during the endurance run," he said during a brief rest period, "and I realize I've been approaching training all wrong. I've been so focused on individual achievement that I forgot about the team aspect of military service." His words reflected a genuine change in perspective, the kind of personal growth that the military training process was designed to foster. Eliza's example had forced him to confront his own priorities and assumptions about leadership and strength. Walsh, meanwhile, had become increasingly sophisticated in her observations and questions. Her analytical mind had been working to understand the patterns and capabilities she had witnessed, and her conclusions were becoming more pointed. "I've been doing some research," she said quietly during one of their training sessions, reading about special operations units and their selection criteria. The physical conditioning, the technical skills, the calm under pressure, everything you demonstrated matches the profile of someone with advanced military training. Her voice carried the certainty of someone who had solved a puzzle through careful observation and logical deduction. Eliza met her gaze steadily, recognizing that Walsh's intelligence and persistence made her a formidable investigator. "That's an interesting theory," Eliza replied diplomatically, "but I think you might be reading more into the situation than was actually there." Walsh smiled knowingly. "Maybe, but if I'm right, if you do have specialized training and experience, I want you to know that you can trust me. Whatever brought you here, whatever your real purpose might be, I respect the fact that you use your skills to help Rodriguez." Her words carried an offer of alliance and discretion, the beginning of what could develop into genuine friendship if properly nurtured. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Martinez, who seemed to have an uncanny ability to appear whenever sensitive topics were being discussed. As the final weeks of basic training progressed, Eliza found herself walking an increasingly delicate line between maintaining her cover and meeting the expectations that had been created by her actions during the endurance run. Other recruits sought her guidance and leadership, while the drill instructors seemed to be watching her more closely and presenting her with increasingly challenging scenarios. During a comprehensive exercise that combined multiple skills and scenarios, she found herself appointed as team leader for a group that included Walsh, Thompson, Kim, and several other recruits who had come to respect her judgment and capabilities. The assignment was both an honor and a challenge, requiring her to balance leadership responsibilities with her preference for remaining in the background. The exercise scenario involved a simulated rescue mission behind enemy lines, requiring the team to navigate hostile territory, locate and extract friendly personnel, and return to base while avoiding or neutralizing opposition forces. Eliza's leadership style was collaborative and inclusive, seeking input from team members while maintaining clear authority and decision-making responsibility. Her approach drew on principles and techniques that seemed advanced for someone with her supposed background, further reinforcing the growing conviction among her teammates that there was much more to her story than had been revealed. The mission proceeded smoothly through its initial phases, with the team successfully navigating the insertion point and moving toward their objective without detection. Eliza's tactical awareness and terrain reading skills kept them on efficient routes while avoiding the opposition forces that Martinez had positioned throughout the exercise area when they reached the simulated crash site where they were supposed to locate and extract friendly personnel. They discovered a scenario more complex than anticipated. The survivors included both ambulatory personnel and seriously injured individuals who would require careful handling and transportation. "All right, team," Eliza said quietly, assessing the situation while maintaining security. "We have multiple casualties with varying degrees of injury. Walsh and Thompson, you establish perimeter security. Kim, you help me assess the injured and prepare them for movement. Foster, you coordinate with the ambulatory survivors to gather intelligence about enemy positions." Her instructions were clear and professional, reflecting tactical thinking that impressed everyone present. The execution of the extraction proceeded with clockwork precision, each team member performing their assigned role while adapting to changing circumstances and unexpected challenges. When opposition forces finally located their position and initiated contact, the team's response was immediate and coordinated. Eliza's tactical commands were crisp and effective, positioning her people to maximum advantage while ensuring the safety of the personnel they were extracting. The successful completion of the exercise earned praise from Martinez and the other evaluators, who noted the team's exceptional coordination and Eliza's outstanding leadership under pressure. Their comments were professional and appropriate, but carried undertones that suggested deeper evaluation criteria than mere basic training performance standards. As basic training drew toward its conclusion, Eliza found herself anticipating whatever assignment or revelation awaited her. The careful game of concealment and gradual disclosure had played out over weeks of increasingly complex scenarios, building towards some climax that would finally reveal the true purpose behind her presence at Fort Bradley. Captain Williams provided that revelation during a final individual interview, conducted in the same austere office where they had first acknowledged the existence of deeper purposes and hidden agendas. His manner was more relaxed and open than before, suggesting that the time for careful probing and indirect communication had passed. "Your performance throughout basic training has been exemplary," he began without preamble. "More importantly, your demonstrated capabilities align perfectly with the requirements of a special assignment that requires someone with your particular combination of skills and psychological profile." His words finally brought their long game of hints and implications into the open. The mission involved deep cover, insertion into a hostile organization that had been recruiting military personnel for purposes that remained unclear. They needed someone who could convincingly portray a recent basic training graduate while possessing the advanced skills necessary to gather intelligence and potentially conduct direct action operations. The cover story you've been living for the past 8 weeks becomes your permanent identity for the duration of the mission, Williams explained. Eliza Shaw, the quiet girl from Nebraska, who surprised everyone by demonstrating extraordinary capabilities under pressure. That narrative provides perfect justification for your selection while explaining any advanced skills you might need to display. The elegant simplicity of the cover story impressed her with its completeness and believability. As Williams outlined the details of her new assignment, Eliza felt the familiar surge of anticipation and purpose that came with receiving a mission worthy of her training and capabilities. The weeks of careful deception and controlled revelation had all been leading to this moment when she could finally apply her skills in service of objectives that mattered. The transformation from Eliza Shaw, basic training recruit, to Eliza Shaw, special operations asset, was complete. Her legend was established, her capabilities demonstrated, and her cover story validated by weeks of carefully observed performance. The relationships she had built with her fellow recruits would serve as additional layers of authenticity, providing a network of witnesses who could testify to her character and abilities if questions ever arose about her background. On the final day of basic training, as the recruits prepared for graduation and dispersal to their permanent assignments, Thompson approached Eliza with an expression that mixed respect with genuine affection. "I don't know where you're going or what you'll be doing," he said honestly, "but I want you to know that serving alongside you has made me a better soldier and a better person. Whatever prepared you for this moment, I'm grateful that our paths crossed." Walsh's farewell was characteristically analytical but equally heartfelt. "I still don't know your whole story," she said with a smile, "but I've learned enough to know that wherever you're going, you'll make a difference. The quiet strength you've shown, the way you put others before yourself, that's the kind of leadership the military needs." Kim's goodbye reflected his thoughtful nature and growing understanding of what he had witnessed. "I may never know the full truth about who you really are," he said, "but I'll never forget what I learned from watching you work. You've shown me that real strength isn't about making noise or demanding attention. It's about being ready when others need you most." Even Martinez, who rarely showed emotion during official ceremonies, made a point of seeking her out after the graduation ceremony. Shaw, he said quietly. "In 20 years of training recruits, I've never seen anyone handle pressure the way you did during that endurance run. Whatever assignment you're heading to, they're lucky to have you." His words carried the weight of professional recognition from someone who had seen the best and worst that military training could produce. For Eliza, his assessment represented validation that her performance had achieved exactly the balance she had been seeking, exceptional enough to justify her selection for special operations, but believable enough to maintain her cover story, As she packed her gear and prepared to leave Fort Bradley for her new assignment, Eliza reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The careful balance of concealment and revelation, the gradual building of trust and respect among her fellow recruits, and the systematic demonstration of capabilities that seemed impossible for someone with her supposed background had all combined to create the perfect legend for whatever mission lay ahead. The story of the girl who stopped running had become the foundation for something much larger and more important, a testament to the power of preparation, the value of patience, and the ultimate triumph of skill and dedication over assumption and prejudice. Rodriguez, fully recovered and back to his normal duties, had made a special point of attending the graduation ceremony. As Eliza prepared to board the transport that would take her to her new assignment, he approached her with the measured steps of someone who understood the weight of the moment. "Shaw," he said formally, his voice carrying the respect of one professional acknowledging another, "I want you to know that what you did out there saved my life. But more than that, it showed everyone what real soldiers are made of. Whatever lies ahead for you, you'll always have my gratitude and respect." His words represented more than personal thanks. They were recognition from the military family that she had earned her place among them through demonstrated courage and competence. The laughter from her fellow recruits when she had first stopped running seemed like an echo from another lifetime, a reminder of how completely circumstances could reveal hidden truths about human potential and purpose. As the transport pulled away from Fort Bradley, carrying her toward whatever challenges awaited in the shadowy world of special operations, Eliza smiled quietly to herself. The quiet girl from Nebraska had successfully navigated the complex requirements of deep cover while building genuine relationships based on demonstrated competence and character. The foundation had been laid for whatever came next, built on a bedrock of proven capability and earned trust that would serve her well in whatever missions lay ahead in service to her country and its interests. The transformation was complete, but the real work was just beginning. The laughter had stopped long ago, replaced by respect, admiration, and the understanding that strength comes in many forms, and sometimes the most powerful forces are those that remain hidden until the moment they are needed most. Eliza Shaw, the girl who carried a 200-pound sergeant 3 miles without breaking stride, was ready for whatever came next. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our everyday life stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.